Jascha Heifetz is arguably the greatest violinist of the 20th century. Others might think otherwise, but you'll have trouble convincing me. As soon as you hear him play, you know that greatness is going into your ears. This video will not be an attempt to give you a detailed biography of Heifetz. In fact, there will not be that much biographical material. You can read his official biography, from which I've taken facts for this video, on your own time, and the link is in the description. Heifetz was born in 1901 in the then Russian-occupied Lithuania. The young Jascha received his first violin instruction actually from his father, and went on to make waves across Europe even as a young boy of age 11 or 12. Before age 10, Heifetz had already entered the St. Petersburg Conservatory to study with the great Leopould Auer. Heifetz's father also enrolled in the conservatory, not necessarily to further his own playing, but just so he could be with his son. The Heifetz family was Jewish, and we all know how the Russian government at the time treated Jews. In fact, St. Petersburg was closed to Jews, and the only way for Mr. Heifetz, Jascha's father, to get a permit to live in St. Petersburg was to enroll in the conservatory himself. In 1911, Heifetz gave one of his first performances in David Oistrak's hometown of Odessa, Ukraine. This was about the time when Oistrak was picking up his toy violin and playing with it. I couldn't find any evidence that the Oistrak family was actually there, but there's a good chance they could have been. There were thousands of people there. Heifetz was going to make his American debut in 1914, but on account of World War I, nobody was really traveling in and out of Europe. The Heifetz family would actually move to America in 1917, right at the start of the 1917 Russian Revolution. Let's just say things started to get ugly, and they got out of Dodge. I'll link some pages about the 1917 revolution in the description, and you can read them. It's quite interesting. The journey from St. Petersburg to New York took about 6 months. The Heifetz family took the Trans-Siberian Railroad from St. Petersburg to Japan, and then they caught a boat across the Pacific Ocean to San Francisco, California. And then from there they took trains to New York. That must have been a long, tiring journey. They finally arrived in New York in August of 1917, only 2 months ahead of Jascha's debut at Carnegie Hall in October of that year. The young Heifetz's fame preceded him. The audience that night at his premiere was a who's who of great violinists of the time, many of whom have unfortunately fallen into obscurity. Two of the greats that are still at least somewhat famous were Fritz Kreisler and Mischa Elman. Elman was a fellow pupil of Heifetz's teacher Leopould Auer. Elman is reported to have asked the pianist Leopold Godowsky, "Is it getting hot in here?" Godowsky replied, "Not for pianists." Interestingly enough, though, Heifetz was also a very good pianist. In the wake of this concert, Fritz Kreisler was reported to have said, "We might as well just smash our violins across our knees." After this sensational debut, Heifetz would go on to concertize and record all over the world. In fact, Heifetz made recordings in St. Petersburg in the year 1911. This was when recording technology was just becoming a thing. The equipment was big, it was heavy, it was expensive, and just to be recorded at all was a big deal. Throughout Heifetz's career, his reputation through his recordings would precede him. His fame actually became known outside of the violin and music world, and the name Heifetz became synonymous with just perfection. $120.23 for a tune-up? Who tuned it? Jascha Heifetz? In World War II, Jascha Heifetz would perform for Allied troops in Europe, sometimes off of the back of a flatbed truck with a camouflaged upright piano on it. Yeah, that had to be kind of funny looking, but I guess it worked. As you might recall from my last video on David Oistrakh, Oistrakh actually did similar things for the Russian troops. But I'm sure that Heifetz, as a US citizen at that point, wasn't forced in any way or in fear of his life for not doing something like that. Later in Heifetz's life while he was living in California, he became involved in many social causes that have implications today. He was a champion of making 911 the emergency phone number for this country. He was also involved in cleaning up the air in California. He and his students actually wore gas masks to protest the Los Angeles smog. Smog is basically when man-made pollutants, usually from burning fossil fuels in cars and power plants, combine with chemicals in the air and or they react with the sunlight and they create this nasty stuff that makes it hard to breathe and hard to see. In 1967, Heifetz actually had his little Renault car converted into electric. Now this is interesting because an electric car actually has some of the characteristics that make Heifetz's violin sound so great. Let's digress a bit. Warning, I'm stretching far into the realm of my own conjecture. Great violin sound comes primarily from creating an intense vibration right at the start of the note. An electric drive system in a car has all of its force available from a dead stop. As soon as you step on the gas pedal, it's giving everything it's got. A gasoline engine takes a while to rev up to the point when it's actually producing a lot of power. You step on the gas and it's like, you really want me to go? All right. A violin sound that takes a long time to get up to speed is simply no good most of the time. We want full force right away. Heifetz was great at creating all of his sonic power smoothly, quickly, and cleanly, just like an electric motor in a car can. Was the power characteristic of an electric drive system on Heifetz's mind as he made this conversion? Probably not. But in this way, his sound is very electric. Anyway, the conversion to electric was a very Southern California go green kind of thing to do. Jascha Heifetz died in 1987, which really isn't that long ago, even though it might seem like that to my younger viewers. I think it's really great that he lived through the time when recording technology was getting really, really good. In fact, some of his recordings from the 1950s and 60s are some of my personal favorites. I think they sound better than the stuff that's produced today. Sometimes I wonder why certain artists stand the test of time and others don't. Some names we know, many, many, many more are simply forgotten. So, what makes just a few musicians, violinists in particular, stand out in history? I think Heifetz has a definite thing that helps him to stand out from the crowd even today. Many kids who wow audiences when very young fall off the radar pretty quickly. Heifetz didn't. He started as a very young boy, and even though his critical acclaim was far from universal, some people didn't like his performances that much. Heifetz's sound and playing have stood this harsh test of time. His recordings still sell, and videos of his playing on YouTube get lots of views. So what makes Heifetz's sound go from just great to having this timeless quality? That's a hard question to answer, and impossible to answer definitively, but here's my best rambling on it. In most people's lives, friendships and people, they come and go. Pets and animals, they come and go. The things we own come and go. Celebrities rise to and fall from fame. In all the comings and goings of life, certain people and things find a way into our hearts that others just don't. It goes far beyond just liking these people and things. There's just something different sometimes. I like to cook. I could buy a really nice non-stick skillet that would work absolutely great for many things. I would enjoy cooking in it. I would make a lot of delicious stuff in it. But I know such a thing would only work well for a few years. So I would have to toss it and buy a new one eventually. It would lose its usefulness. It would be nice, but it has a definite lifespan. I love my old cast iron skillet that's been around for longer than I have. Even though it misbehaves sometimes, I love its durability and renewability, something that high-tech pans just don't have. It'll be around for a long time. The stick-around factor, along with the feeling of connection to the past, is what I love. Even with my newer pans, I feel the connection to future meals that are sure to be cooked in them. But what does all this food stuff have to do with Heifetz? I mean, everything with me has to come down to food eventually. But why might I think that Heifetz is the cast iron pan of violinists? I guess what I'm getting at is the sense of connection that we all long for as human beings. Especially at a time like this in May of 2020, we feel disconnected from the world around us. When I listen to Heifetz, I can almost feel and think what the composer is feeling and thinking. Heifetz makes me feel connected to the greatness and people of the past. This is actually very similar to David Oistrak's thoughts on humanity in music. Heifetz connects us to the music and to the composer in a totally unique way. He's not just riding on initial wow factor. He gets to the heart of the music and brings you in. You don't feel like you're listening to Heifetz, but you can feel the composer coming alive through the sound, the performance, and the notes. And it's not just that Heifetz executed stuff really well, that he played lots of notes really fast, really in tune, really perfectly. Lots of violinists play perfectly, but don't become that famous and aren't really that great. There are too many recordings that are just patched together out of what brilliant engineers could salvage and construct from substandard takes. I've actually found imperfections in Heifetz's recordings, and you know what? They don't bother me, because I know the recording is a true performance that actually happened. So the question is, how do we play a little bit like Heifetz? Well, first of all, his way of producing sound is unique. He had a tendency to use really heavy bow pressure close to the bridge and a lot of bow speed. Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for crunch. We can think of this like a cliff's edge. If you're on the edge, the sound is good. But if you fall off, crunch. We know that as you get closer to the edge of a cliff, the more spectacular the view, the more you can see, the wider expanse that's visible. Heifetz was great at walking on that edge of that tonal cliff and giving us that wide expanse of sound without falling off and going crunch. This is actually a skill that we can practice ourselves. So when you're playing and practicing, find that crunch point with bow pressure, placement, and speed. And stay just the good sound side of it and see how long you can stay there. Eventually you're going to make a crunch and an ugly noise, but who cares? It's practice. You're figuring stuff out. The less scientific and acoustical part is actually quite hard. The sense of connection between composer and listener is crazy delicate. For me, playing the notes well is only one part of the question. The best thing we can do is ask a ton of questions of the music. When you listen, ask what you're hearing. What instruments are being used? Dynamics, articulations. Is it high or is it low? Ask why. If you've spent any amount of time with a small child between about the ages of 3 and 5, you'll know they ask a ton of questions. And kind of comically, older people have a lot of trouble answering them. To a young child, the world is an alien place. I mean, they're created and popped out into a strange world that they have to learn everything about, and a lot of people expect them to learn very quickly. The child wants to make it less alien, but has very little information to piece together into a coherent picture. What I think keeps us from forming that intimate connection between the composer and the listener is actually just a false sense of familiarity with the music we think we know well, just because we can play the notes. We should be thinking like young children in a big, bad alien world. We get bogged down in just playing the notes and rhythms and stop asking why about everything, if we even remember to do that in the first place. My challenge to you is take a piece that you know how to play, you know the notes and rhythms, no matter how simple or easy it may seem, and treat it like it's an alien world, even asking why certain notes are what they are. Like, what happens if I change that D to an E? What about the sounds does it change? Why is that note a D? Why is that note a B? Why? Be annoying. Here is my non-comprehensive list of things you can ask. Are the notes moving up or down? Are the notes moving by step, skip, big leap, or just repeating? What notes do you feel are important? What is the feeling of the rhythm? What is the dynamic and what feeling does it create? What is the articulation and what feeling does it create? What are the chords and what feeling do they create together? Is it major or minor? Is there a feeling of tension building or release? That covers a lot of the big bases, but please comment with your additions to the list. In your practice, it is your job to ask and figure out the why behind every aspect of the music. Pick just one of those parameters, one of those why questions, and mess with it. Change things. See why the composer made it the way it was. You'll find out that you can often figure out what someone is thinking by what they didn't do or didn't write. It's really cool. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can say or do to you that can make you just sound like Heifetz. And even if we don't sound like Heifetz, we can still enter a bit into those timeless connections between the composer and the listener by entering more deeply into the music. Even if it looks easy, and let me tell you, Heifetz makes it look crazy easy. He even drew ire from critics because they think he looked cold and stoic as he performed. Far from the truth. He just looked that way because everything in him was going into the music. Was Heifetz consciously asking all these questions all the time? Of course not. It's impossible to think of all this. But as you build your ability to ask why, you'll build connections in your brain to just figure stuff out rather than just plow through the notes and rhythms your teacher tells you to. Because that's not really making music. The why is what is behind all great music making, and that is what set Heifetz apart from the rest.